Eggs, a commonplace ingredient in our daily lives, may seem ordinary but contain intricate philosophical and ethical issues. In Buddhist precepts, food is often regarded as an essential aspect of practice. How to choose food and how to adhere to the precepts in diet are daily challenges that Buddhist monks must face. Among them, the fate of the egg lies in a perplexing gray area within the boundaries of vegetarian and non-vegetarian distinctions. The controversy surrounding the egg arises from its uniqueness. It appears lifeless, yet it possesses the potential to develop into a chick. Consuming it does not constitute a violation of the precepts. This series of questions has made eggs a challenging issue within Buddhist precepts, causing their status to waver between the distinctions of vegetarian and non-vegetarian. In the history of Buddhism, discussions about whether eggs can be consumed have long existed, often accompanied by legendary stories and debates. As early as 1,000 years ago, many venerable monks and great masters had already engaged in profound debates on this matter. One of the most widely discussed topics among people is the debate between the modern eminent monk Zhi Daolin and Shakyamuni Buddha. Zhi Daolin was a learned high monk, renowned worldwide for his eloquence and debating skills. He has a profound understanding of the precepts and holds a clear view regarding the permissibility of consuming eggs. He firmly believes that if an egg contains no embryo and shows no signs of life, consuming it does not violate the Buddhist precept of non-harming, ahimsa. Zhi Daolin's viewpoint was widely accepted by many monks at the time, who believed that since the egg had not yet hatched into a chick and the unpurified egg did not possess life, it was essentially harmless. To prove his point, he once solemnly debated with his master, arguing that an egg does not contain a living chicken and that using it does not constitute the sin of taking life. However, unexpectedly, after the debate between Zhi Daolin and the master concluded, a remarkable turn of events occurred. After the master's passing, Zhi Daolin went to pay respects and respectfully prayed for blessings at the master's spirit tablet. However, to his astonishment, his master manifested supernatural powers and suddenly placed an egg on the ground. Before long, it hatched into a chick. This miraculous phenomenon deeply shocked and humbled Zhi Daolin. He was at a loss for words and deeply bowed in gratitude to the master's manifestation. At the same time, he felt deep remorse for his past convictions. From that point on, he no longer dared to lightly argue about whether eggs were edible. This story is not merely about an ordinary debate defeat. It also triggers profound philosophical reflections on whether eggs are suitable for consumption. He elevated the issue of whether to take life to a new level, enabling Zhi Daolin to gain a deeper understanding of Buddhist precepts and the law of cause and effect. Although Zhi Daolin's debate was highly persuasive, the event in which the Buddha manifested supernatural powers undoubtedly served as a strong warning to him. Even seemingly harmless objects should not be taken lightly if there is a possibility of life behind them. In addition, Buddhist scriptures also abound with similar contradictions and exceptions. For example, during his practice, Shakyamuni Buddha, due to physical weakness, accepted the offering of goat's milk from a shepherd. These historical contexts and classical examples reflect the complexity of the issue regarding egg consumption. They not only reveal the moral dilemmas behind the ingredient of eggs, but also provoke reflection on the applicable scope of the Buddhist precepts themselves. Beyond strict precepts, is there room for flexible adjustment? The controversy over eggs is not merely about the food itself. It deeply involves Buddhist doctrine, philosophy, and the profound introspection of practitioners' inner cultivation. At the core of Buddhist precepts, non-harming, ahimsa, is regarded as the supreme moral principle. It requires followers to harbor compassion for all sentient beings and to respect all forms of life. However, whether eggs should be regarded as beings to be killed has become a complex and thought-provoking philosophical issue within Buddhist precepts. This question not only concerns whether the egg itself still contains life, but also deeply involves the understanding of vitality and causality. More importantly, It prompts us to reflect on how to navigate the conflict between physiological needs and moral teachings while adhering to the precepts. From the Buddhist perspective, all life follows the law of cause and effect, meaning every action produces corresponding results. Wholesome actions bring merit and blessings, while unwholesome actions accumulate karmic obstacles. Therefore, the choice of food is not merely a matter of daily necessity. It also carries the moral responsibility of the practitioner. If an egg is considered alive, it may be viewed as an act of taking life, and consuming it could result in negative karmic consequences. Whether an egg can be eaten depends on whether it still contains life, whether it harbors a being on the brink of hatching. However, there is no simple answer to this question. We often hear the argument that if an egg is unfertilized, then there is no embryo within it, and therefore no life. Consuming it seems not to violate the precepts. However, Buddhist teachings do not simply rely on what the naked eye perceives. They encourage a deeper level of contemplation. Can we be certain that consuming eggs from chickens that have not been killed truly does not generate karmic obstacles? Even if the eggs appear lifeless, do they not still inherently contain some potential for life? All of this leads to deeper questions and reflections on the concept of life. In the discussion of the consumption of eggs and the issue of taking life, another core issue gradually emerges, which is the relationship between a practitioner's inner realization and the precepts. The Buddhist precept of non-harming extends beyond clear behavioral regulations. Its true significance transcends mere actions, profoundly reflecting the practitioner's inner awakening and moral consciousness. Observance of the precepts is not merely outward behavioral discipline. It is the practitioner's continuous transcendence of desire, greed, and ignorance within the heart, representing profound cultivation at the level of the mind. Buddhism emphasizes that the mind is Buddha. The essence of practice lies in purifying the mind and awakening one's intrinsic nature, rather than simply adhering to external rules. Therefore, precepts are not the goal of practice, but the path guiding practitioners toward enlightenment. The significance of the precepts lies in restraining external behaviors to promote inner purity and clarity. The question of whether eggs are fit for consumption is precisely a profound consideration of this point. When a practitioner faces the choice of whether to eat an egg, he is not merely making a decision about food. He is examining his own mind, whether he can free himself from desire for food, whether he can transcend attachment to gustatory cravings. These matters are closely connected to the practitioner's inner awakening. Master Yin Guang once pointed out that the observance of precepts is closely related to the practitioner's inner cultivation. Practitioners with profound wisdom roots can purify their attachment to food and desires from the heart, while those with shallower wisdom roots may not be able to let go of these desires immediately. Therefore, their adherence to precepts needs to be gradual and progressive. This perspective reflects an important fact. The process of cultivation cannot be accomplished by everyone abruptly. Rather, it requires adopting flexible disciplinary methods according to individuals' varied inner realization and wisdom. For practitioners whose minds have not yet fully evolved, the observance of precepts is not initially achieved without any heedlessness. Rather, it is a gradual process of evolution and continual correction. In this process, the choice of eggs as an ingredient serves as a mirror reflecting the practitioner's inner awakening. Eating or not eating is not merely adherence to precepts, but also an examination of one's inner desires. If a practitioner harbors greed in their heart, the desire for food becomes an inescapable bondage. If a practitioner has attained a certain level of enlightenment, the choice of material objects no longer becomes an attachment of the mind, but rather a natural and spontaneous action. From this perspective, the practical issue of eggs is not merely about whether it violates precepts, but more about whether practitioners can transcend the formal precepts and attain true inner awakening. When a practitioner chooses to consume eggs, they need to ask themselves whether this arises from inner greed and whether they're consciously avoiding dependence on sensual cravings. The true meaning of cultivation does not lie in strictly adhering to precepts, but in using the practice of following precepts as a means to examine one's own mind, to discover and eliminate the hidden desires and attachments. The external form of precepts is merely a tool to guide practitioners toward inner awakening. The ultimate goal is to use this tool to help practitioners reach a state of selflessness and desirelessness. When delving deeply into the relationship between egg consumption and Buddhist precepts, another important factor that cannot be overlooked is the conflict between health needs and the precepts. Practitioners must always consider their physical health and physiological needs while observing the precepts. This aspect often becomes complex and challenging under the strict constraints of Buddhist precepts, especially when practitioners are physically weak or facing severe health issues. How to fulfill physiological needs while observing the precepts becomes a matter worthy of careful consideration. Buddhist precepts emphasize non-harming, which is a fundamental principle that every practitioner must adhere to. However, the needs for health sometimes conflict with the precepts. For example, practitioners during their practice may experience extreme physical exhaustion and weakness due to prolonged fasting or excessive asceticism. At this moment, is it permissible to break the precepts and temporarily accept certain foods that might be considered violations of the precepts in order to maintain basic bodily vitality? This question is not simple. It relates to the applicability of the precepts and the purpose of practice. Do practitioners cultivate their practice to maintain physical health? Welcome to the boundless teachings of the Dharma. He believes that when a practitioner is in an extremely weakened state and cannot restore health through practice alone, appropriate dietary adjustments are permissible. In this regard, he does not emphasize strict adherence to formalities, but rather stresses the principle of skillful means, making flexible adjustments according to the specific circumstances of the practitioner to facilitate their continued practice. Therefore, if health issues cannot be ignored and may even endanger the practitioner's life, Master Yinguang believes that temporarily relaxing the precepts and accepting necessary material assistance is understandable and acceptable. This mode of thinking is not uncommon in the history of Buddhism, and there are numerous examples indicating that Buddhist precepts are not immutable. During his own practice, Shakyamuni Buddha became physically weak and nearly lost his life due to excessive asceticism. At this moment, he accepted the sheep's milk offered by the shepherdess. Although goat's milk is considered impure in traditional Buddhism, Shakyamuni Buddha did not abandon his practice because of it. On the contrary, this behavior is interpreted as a convenience arising from physiological needs, intended to maintain the vitality of the body, enabling it to continue with deeper practice. This story has become an important reference for many Buddhist practitioners when facing conflicts between health and precepts. Master Yinguang's flexible thinking is precisely founded upon such a theoretical basis. Although the precepts emphasize not taking life, Master Yinguang believed that the practitioner's physical health is equally important. Health is the foundation of spiritual practice. If health issues prevent the continuation of practice, a moderate relaxation of precepts is actually an expression of dependent origination, intended to address the practical difficulties encountered by practitioners under specific conditions. Master Yinguang's thought emphasizes the flexibility and adaptability of Buddhist precepts rather than rigidity and absolutism. He believes that the purpose of the precepts is to guide practitioners toward enlightenment, rather than to become shackles that bind their practice. In special circumstances concerning health needs, the flexibility of precepts can precisely aid practitioners in better achieving their spiritual goals. However, this flexible way of thinking does not imply that precepts can be arbitrarily relaxed. Practitioners still need to maintain a high level of mindfulness and vigilance. The relaxation of precepts must be premised on not undermining inner awakening and cannot be used as an excuse to indulge one's inner greed and harmful habits. Therefore, even when health issues arise, practitioners should maintain respect and reflection for the precepts, rather than abandoning the fundamental spirit of the precepts simply to satisfy desires. This also reminds us that in modern society, with the diversification of lifestyles and health issues, practitioners must still assess the situation wisely and respond flexibly when facing conflicts between disciplinary precepts and health needs. In the discussion about whether eggs can be consumed, we gradually entered a more profound philosophical realm. This is not merely about the choice of food, but a profound reflection on the essence of spiritual practice. As Master Yin Guang stated, the usefulness of an egg does not solely depend on whether it is still alive, but rather on how the practitioner understands the relationship between vitality and causality. A deeper reflection is whether practitioners can, through the concrete act of eating, perceive beyond the surface to the desires and attachments within a mind. The goal of practice is always to enable practitioners to let go from the depths of their hearts those attachments, desires, and ignorance. This process does not depend on external forms, but arises through inner awareness and wisdom. When we shift the focus from the concrete food, the egg, to the practitioner's inner reflection, we realize that the observance of precepts is not the ultimate goal of practice. It is merely a means, helping practitioners consciously examine and overcome the obstacles within their minds. The ultimate goal of practice is to transcend all external forms through a serene mind, thereby attaining true freedom and enlightenment. The choice of physical objects is only a very small aspect of the practice. It is not the core of cultivation. Practitioners, through the act of selecting physical objects, are essentially examining the desires within their own minds. If a practitioner can transcend their inner attachment to foods such as eggs and meat, truly achieving a state of desirelessness and non-attachment, then regardless of what they consume, they will not be bound by the external form of the food. This point is reflected in the thought of Master Yin Guang. He emphasized that the key to practice lies not in strict adherence to external forms, but in perceiving the essence behind the precepts, which is inner tranquility and awakening. If a practitioner becomes overly attached to the selection of physical objects, they may eventually fall into formalism, neglecting the true cultivation of the mind. Precepts are the bridge that aids practitioners in attaining enlightenment, rather than the ultimate goal itself. In other words, the ultimate purpose of practice does not lie in strictly observing the precepts, but in whether the practitioner can, through the observance of the precepts, discover and purify the inner greed, attachment, and ignorance, ultimately attaining true spiritual liberation. This also reveals another layer of significance regarding the consumption of eggs. Behind seemingly simple food choices lies the practitioner's consideration of desire and attachment. The choice of eggs as food symbolizes the practitioner's level of attachment to the material world. If a practitioner develops excessive attachment to eggs, it becomes an obstacle in their practice, regardless of its practical usefulness. If a practitioner can transcend such attachment and regard food merely as a tool to sustain the body's life rather than an object to satisfy desires, then they have already advanced to a higher level of cultivation. Through this reflection, we can draw an important conclusion. The essence of practice does not lie in the strict observance of precepts, but in the practitioner's inner awakening and self-transcendence. Whether one can eat eggs is essentially a question of form. It concerns how practitioners view their desires and attachments. Practitioners need to use their understanding of these external forms to discover and transcend the constraints within their own minds. Ultimately, the purpose of practice is to enable the practitioner to attain inner freedom, no longer constrained by external forms, truly achieving desirelessness and equanimity of mind, ultimately reaching inner liberation and awakening.